Let's welcome our guest, Jamie Jones, to the house this morning. Come on.
What's up, Eastland? How are y'all this morning? It is so good to see you. I will bring the Southern twang to your life today. I will have plenty of y'alls. I don't know anything about Ewans or anything like that, but it's really good to be here. You guys are in a series called Church Connection, and Ryan, in all of his great wisdom, decided he would give me the hardest of the subjects, I believe, when it comes to life in general. Today's message is entitled, We Hurt Together. And don't turn your brains off yet, because the thing that comes along with pain and with grief is it gets everybody at some point in their life. You know, we all think that grief is centered just around the loss of a loved one, the death of a loved one, and it is. It's a major pivotal role in the grief process in our lives, because we do lose loved ones. And they leave, and we have this great sadness, but hurt and grief is not only entangled with death, but it also comes with the loss of many things. You may lose a job. You may lose a home. You may lose friends. Relationships come and they go, and sometimes you lose friendships that you never thought would ever be able to leave, and when they do, you're just lost, and you're at this point where you're like, I'm hurting on the inside, and I don't know what to do. You may lose independence as we grow older. We start to we're not able to do the things we used to do. Amen. Can anybody feel that? For the past 2 days, I've not been able to do my head farther than this. And I used to be like Exorcist. I think I could turn it all the way around. And when we get older, we start to lose independence. But you also may be losing dependence. Maybe you had kids in your home, and praise the Lord, they've grown up, and you've sent them off to college, and now it's just you and your spouse, and you're looking around going, it sure is quiet. Where's everybody at? And we have these times and these trials that come into our lives, and we're all faced with them, and we all have them, we all hurt. But a lot of us, we don't know how to manage it. My job is to go into homes of people who have been given 6 months or less to live. And so I meet with patients daily, I meet with families daily, and I sit in front of them and I hear their stories and I hear their grief that they're already having before they even lose their loved ones. And my job is to bring them peace. My job is to do some kind of extra spiritual work of magic almost, because they want me to come in and to fix what's going on. But the truth is I can't fix anything. The only one that can fix it is Jesus. And it's great when you sit in front of a 98-year-old lady who has been in church for 98 years of her life. She was born in church. She got married in church. She had babies in church. She did all of her whole life is centered around church. It's so spectacular to sit there and to meet with people who say, I'm just ready to go home. But it's also scary when you sit in front of people who say, I don't believe in God. I don't know what's next. And so today I want to give you a couple of ideas about grief so that when you encounter it, because there's a lot of us in here who are probably sitting in it. We're sitting in grief. We're sitting in hurt. I want to give you some ideas about what the Bible says, about what great biblical teachers say, what I'm able to use in my daily work and in my daily life as a pastor or as a counselor. But I want to help you because we all are going to encounter grief, whether we're in it now or whether it hits us in the face when we walk out of here. You see, the problem with grief is a lot of people who have it, who have hurt, who have pain, when it comes, they just totally shut down. And my wife will tell you, I'm one of those guys, like if I'm hurt or if I have grief, I just shut it off. I shut my whole brain off, my emotions, I cut them off. Spiritually, we can turn it off. We can say, well, God, I don't understand why this is happening. I'm just going to stop talking to you. I'm going to stop reading about you. I'm going to stop getting around the people who love you, the people who encourage me. I'm going to turn off spiritually. And the problem with that is that when we turn off spiritually or emotionally, we leave the whole life that we have open for problems to come in. Rick Warren says it best. He says that people who do not grieve and let it out will end up acting it out in an unhealthy way. And for some of us, that means that people who don't grieve in the right way, they're going to start acting it out in ways of addiction. When you're hurt and you're in grief and you don't know what to do, it's really easy to go to people who seem like they're very happy, and you know what they tell you? Hey, let's try this. Take this. Drink this. It'll make you feel better. Or it could be something as small as, let's go to the movies. Let's medicate your pain in a way that's not healthy. Let's try to forget about what's going on in your life and move past it. But grief has to be felt. It has to be something that we go through. And we all do. If you look at Ecclesiastes chapter 3, it'll be on the screen for us. But it just says this. It says, for everything there is a season, a time for every activity under heaven. All of our lives are made up of these different seasons. And for me, I always thought, once I get out of high school, things will calm down. The grief that I felt growing up with my parents being divorced and losing grandparents, when I get out of high school, those things would calm down and I would be able to move forward. And then when I was dating Becky and we got married, I thought once I get married, everything will calm down. And I was wrong, because it didn't. Grief and hurt still came. And then as I got a little bit older and I said, well, once we have a child, once I find a job, once I have a career, once I'm out of college, all of these things I just kept building up and building up, saying, if I can get past this point, I will be okay. But grief and hurt still came to my door, and it still came to our home. And every season of life is always going to have these times where we're going to find ourselves in grief and in hurt. The writer of Ecclesiastes goes on to say that there's a time for us to be born and a time to die, a time to plant, a time to harvest, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to break down, a time to build up, a time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, a time to dance, a time to throw rocks. It's my favorite one. I don't know why, but there's a time to throw rocks, and there's a time to gather rocks. There's a time to embrace, and there's a time not to hug. There's a time to find things. There's a time to lose things. I'm the finder in my relationship with my wife. She loses things. It's my job to find it. There's a time to keep things. That's what I do. I'm a pack rat. She throws things away. There's a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to be quiet. I struggle with that. A time to speak. I'm good with that one. A time to love, a time to hate, a time for war, a time for peace. And as I read that, a lot of us can sit here and go, I can do all of those, except I don't want to weep and I don't want to mourn. Give me some rocks, I'll gather them up, I'll throw them. I will hug, I won't hug. I will talk, I won't talk. I'll have war, I'll have hate, I'll have love, I'll have peace. Weeping and mourning don't even come to me. I don't want any part of it, but the bad thing is the writer said there is a time for every season. There's a time for every activity under heaven, and we're all going to have this time where we are going to go through pain. We're all going to have times of grief. Now, the great part about being in community and being inside of a church and being inside of this great series is the fact that we do not have to go through grief and hurt alone. The writer of Romans says in chapter 12, verse 15, he says, be happy with those who are happy and weep. Weep with those who weep. We rejoice with those who are rejoicing. When you're happy, it's easy to find friends, Jason. They just are beating down your door when you're happy. They want to be happy with you. But when we're sad and we're weeping, the Bible says that we go and we weep alongside of those people. We take part in the pain and the hurt that they have. And not only does that help take the burden off of them, but it lets them know that they have others around them so they're not going through it alone. The biggest problem is we really do love to be happy with those who are happy. We don't want to weep with those who weep. And I think that there's three major problems with folks who can't mourn and they can't see the people who are around them who are mourning. And the first problem is they may be out of touch with reality. You might be walking through your life saying everything is fine and happy. There's flowers, there's rainbows, there's babies and balloons. Everything is just happiness. And you are just so out of touch with reality, you don't see the friends and loved ones you have who are going through pain and hurt. You're just out of touch with what's going on in reality around you. And that'll cause you not to be able to mourn with those who mourn. The second thing is this: you may be out of touch with your own emotions. When you get around people who are weeping and who are mourning, you may just say, well, I just can't do this. I can't weep. I can't mourn. I can't feel the pain of other people's feelings. I can't empathize and sympathize with them. And God is saying, I need you to be here and be present. Jesus was there. He was present. Everyone in the Bible tried to be there for their people most of the time. But if you're out of touch with your emotions, that means that when people are crying and people are hurting, you're just sitting there going, it's going to be a good day. Everything's going to be all right. It's going to be stupendous. The third thing is this, and this is the scariest one of all, is maybe you just don't love people. You know, maybe your whole world and your whole life is so revolved around you that you can't see the fact that there's people who are hurting and broken around you, and you don't want to weep with them because that'll just bring you down. That'll dampen your style. You just don't really care about others. The bad part about that is it's totally unbiblical. The Bible says in John 3:16, one of the greatest known verses in the whole wide world, that God so loved the world. And so it's our job to go out and love others, to be intentional in the fact that when others are laughing, we laugh, but when others are weeping, we sit down and we weep along the side of them. Ecclesiastes shows us that times are not always going to be happy, but they are going to keep on rolling. And seasons in our lives are going to come and they're going to go. And if you're in a season of grief right now, listen, there is a season of happiness that can be around the corner. But whether or not you go through this in a healthy way is your decision. Healthy grief that's handled correctly leads to a healthy spiritual life. It leads to a healthy mental or spiritual life, mental health, and physical health. If you don't grieve correctly, then you know what? You end up having high blood pressure. You end up having emotional struggles and issues. You end up physically feeling the pain of what it is to have around you when it comes to grief and hurt. I sit in front of people all the time who have lost loved one after loved one after loved one, and I tell them, well, how do you feel? And they just say, I'm good. In West Tennessee, I'm good is the answer. Your whole house could burn down, your dog could be gone, your wife could have left you, your kids could have ran away, and if you met them in the Walmart parking lot and you say, hey, brother, how you doing? I'm good, man, how are you? It's just the universal answer for everything. But the problem is we're not good. We're struggling. And I sit in front of people and I tell them, listen, you are a lot like a 2-liter bottle of Coke. Sorry, in the north, are y'all on soda or pop? Soda? You're like a 2-liter bottle of soda. If you take a 2-liter bottle of soda and you shake it up and shake it up and shake it up and you take that cap off all at once, it's going to explode. But you've got to release the pressure just a little bit at a time so that maybe you'll be able to drink whatever carbonation is left in the bottle. And for people, it's a lot like this. We get shook up by hurt and we get shook up by grief and we get shook up and shook up and shook up. But if we don't meet with people, if we don't let off just a little bit of pressure at a time, you know what happens? One day, we just explode. We get so unhealthy and so scared and so broken that one day we just explode. And so it's essential for us to have a healthy grieving process. It's essential for us to have a healthy emotional life. Now, when I grew up, my dad worked 2 jobs, and he would come in late or early in the morning, super late at night, and he would sit down and he would read the paper, and I would sit on his lap and read the paper with him. I couldn't read, but my favorite section was, of course, the cartoons, because you can follow that quick. And one of my favorite cartoons to be able to see was Charlie Brown. Anybody seen Charlie Brown? It's a fantastic cartoon. It may be the reason why we named Lucy Lucy. You never know. But we would watch, I would watch, he would read, and he would read the cartoons about Charlie Brown, and it never failed that it was football season for Charlie Brown, and he would get little Lucy over there with the football, and she was going to hold it for him every time. Come on, Charlie Brown, I'm going to hold it. You're going to kick this one just out of this atmosphere. And Charlie Brown would get ready, and he would count, and he would take off running, and he would go to kick, and every single time, little Lucy, special as she was, she'd move the ball. And he would miss, land on his back, look like a big dummy. And I think, man, that's the best cartoon ever. Lucy would set up her own little lemonade stand, except I don't think she ever sold lemonade. She was the doctor. She was the psychiatrist. And for 5 cents, What a firestorm deal. You can't get this at Sam's. 5 cents. You could get awesome advice from her. Now, I got a lot of Lucy people in my life who want to give me 5-cent advice, and it's bad. You know who they are in your life. The people who, when you go to them and you tell them you have a problem, they will tell you the most outlandish, off-the-wall, craziest thing in the world. I'm really struggling with my grief. I'm really hurt. Well, man, maybe you should go on vacation. Get away from it for a little while. Maybe it'll go away. And we really have to watch out for these Lucys in our lives because they want to give us advice that's not worth anything in the world. But what it does is it just totally wrecks us. It messes us up. It takes us away from the places that we should be. I'll go in and I'll meet with old ladies. Old ladies might be a harsh term. Ladies who are more advanced in age than I am. I can't say gray-haired because I am one. I can't say bald because I am one. They're just a little bit more advanced in age. And I'll go in and you can tell they're just having one of those days where just everything has gone wrong. Sickness has hit their home. Everything's falling apart. I knock on the door. They open it up, put on a terrible smile because there's some random stranger on their front porch. And I say, "How are you today?" And they say, "I'm good. Just don't pay attention to my house. It's a disaster." We all say that, don't we? It doesn't matter. We could be cleaning for 6 hours before somebody gets there. Don't pay attention. It's a disaster. And I'll walk in and they'll stub their toe and they'll cuss and they'll be apologizing to me. "I'm sorry the house is dirty. I'm sorry I said a bad word. I'm sorry for this. I'm sorry for that." And I'm thinking, why are you sorry to me? Your husband is dying. Your everything is falling apart. Your whole world is falling apart. And the only thing you see is what's on the outside that's going on around you. And we'll sit down on the couch and I'll say, "How long have you been married?" And they'll say, 52 years. I'll say, "How many kids do you have?" And she'll start telling me about her children, how proud she is of them, how they spent all this time when their husband and her were retired and they traveled all over the world. And I'll ask these questions about what's going on inside of her, not what's going on around her. And you know what happens? She starts to cry. And I'll go home and Becky will be in the kitchen cooking dinner and I'll come in and she'll say, "How was your day?" And I'll say, "My day was great. I made an old lady cry." And she'll say, "That's horrible." And I'll look at her and I'll go, "It wasn't for her." Because we gotta get this stuff out of us. If we're only looking at what's going around us and what's in our peripheral vision, we have to see what is going on inside of us and what is going on right in front of us. Because listen, we're all going through grief. We're all having pain. We're all losing things. And if we're not able to see what's going on in our own hearts, if we don't have people around us who we can tell it to, then all we're going to end up doing is blowing up. We're going to end up going crazy. And so Ryan calls me in to give you this happy-hearted, joyous message on church connection and hurt. And I really want you to know it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to not be okay. It's not okay if you try to do this alone, though. That's the reason why we have church and the reason why we have connections is so that we don't have to go through these things alone. That we can have people who sit beside us and when we're happy, they're happy. But when we weep, they weep. Jesus said on the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5:4, he said, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." To my generation, this verse is heresy. Blessed are those who mourn. That's not what my generation says. Blessed are those who have the good job. Blessed are those who make the money. Blessed are those who have the bigger car, the bigger house, the hotter wife, the smarter kids. It has never been blessed are those who mourn, but Jesus is crying out to all the people in front of him, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." And for some of us sitting here, we're trying to live the American dream, but listen, you got hurt and you got pain. And Jesus is calling out saying, "Blessed are you who mourn because you will be comforted." So let me give you a couple things that Jesus says. These are ways that we can kind of apply them to ourselves and be able to take this stuff home with us and work through it. Because Jesus knows what we're going through. One of my go-to stories, go-to verses is the story of from John chapter 11. Jesus had a best friend. His name was Lazarus, and he had two sisters, Mary and Martha. And Jesus would go and he would see them. He would hang out with them. He would spend the night with them. He would talk with them. He would eat with them. They were friends. And one day Jesus is off in another land, and he's healing people and doing the great things that Jesus does, just being the man, half God, half man, just fully perfect, just out healing people. And Lazarus gets sick. And Mary and Martha start to freak out, and they say, listen, we're going to send somebody. Go get Jesus. He can do anything. He can fix Lazarus. And so they send the messenger out. They tell Jesus, but Jesus keeps on healing and fixing and doing his thing. And by the time he gets back to where Lazarus' home is, Lazarus is dead. In the King James Version, it says that he's so dead that he stinketh. It's one of my favorite Old Testament words, or not Old Testament words, just King James Version words, that Jesus wanted to see him, and the people around just said, Lord, you don't want to do that. He stinketh. And Jesus, in all of his love, in all of his greatness, in all of his glory, he stands outside the tomb of his friend Lazarus, who is so dead, with his sisters. I would just picture his sisters on both sides, all of the Jews back there crying. And Jesus feels the pain of losing a friend. He feels the pain of those who are around him. And in John chapter 11, verse 35, John wrote these beautiful, beautiful words. Jesus wept. When I read that, I just see Jesus understands my grief. When I see that, I see Jesus has felt grief himself. That the creator of the universe, who created everything, without him there is nothing, John chapter 1, that he felt loss. He felt pain. And when I feel loss and I feel pain, I can close my eyes and say, Jesus, you know what I'm going through. Be with me. And for you who is sitting there today, maybe the pain and the grief in your life is starting to bubble up because you're starting to think of it. Listen, Jesus has felt it. He is not far away from you. And because he has felt it and he is here with you now, he can calm the storms in your life. He stood in the boat with the boys when they were all freaking out and the water's crashing and the winds are coming. And he said, peace, be still. And it was done. And for you who is going through grief and pain and hurt, Jesus can stand up in the boat of your life and say, peace, be still. And he can bring you calm waters. So let me give you a couple of ways you can kind of get this application in your life. 4 quick Baptist points, and then we'll be gone. We're going to go to Jasmine's. We're going to eat chicken rolls and all kinds of good sushi. Point number 1 is this. Don't camp out in your grief. I meet people who have lost loved ones or lost jobs or lost homes or lost independence or whatever it is, and they camped out in their grief, and they've been there for years and years and years and years. They've never tried to go forward. They only look back to the past. They are stuck in the mud and the mire of hurt and grief. You cannot camp out in your grief. You've always got to be reaching forward. But let me tell you this, in the same breath as I say, don't camp out in your grief. Don't rush through grief so fast that you don't feel it. You've got to feel it. You've got to go through it. Lucy watches, my baby, she watches these crazy cartoons all the time on YouTube, and we'll be singing songs together. And she's got one that's called Going on a Lion Hunt. You ever heard this? We're going on a lion hunt. We're going to catch a big one. They come up in the cartoon to a big stream, and they sing, we're going on a lion hunt. We're going to catch a big one. But they've got to cross the stream. How are we going to cross it? Can we go over it? No. Can we go around it? No. Can we go under it? No. We've got to go through it. And for you who are going through grief, listen, you cannot go around it. You can't go over it. You can't go under it. You are going to have to go through grief. You're going to have to go through hurt. You're going to have to go through loss. But don't pitch a tent and stay there. Go through it. Bring your friends, because they will help you to walk when it's bad. But don't camp out. Don't stop. Don't let grief get you stuck. Point number 2 is this. Maintenance of our hurt is important to our health. Maintenance of our hurt is so, so important to our health. I love to drive around and look at old houses. And you can see old houses. I think there's some around here, but you can see some that people haven't lived in 20, 30 years. They're just falling apart. Roofs are caving in. Walls are falling over. The columns on the front have been down for a long time. You can tell somebody hasn't lived there in a really long time. But if you take a house like the Jackson home that's got 4 wild children running through it all the time, and you know that there is dents in the doors and the door frames and crayon writing on the walls, you can see that house from the outside that's lived in, and it's standing. It's strong. And our lives as people on this earth is the same way. If you shut it down in your life and you have zero maintenance, you have zero upkeep, you are just a shell of a person going through the motions day after day after day. When people see you, they will see you start to fall apart. You'll be like those old houses that haven't been lived in a long time, just going through the motions. But if you're a person who lives inside of your own body, and what you do is you meet with people, because sometimes we need to meet with folks and talk it out. When you have joy, you celebrate. When you have pain, you grieve. If you live like that, you will be able to stand strong. If you live inside of the life that God has given you and you don't shut it down, you can stand the storms of life when they come. When people see you, they'll say, that's a person right there that's living their life in the fullest that God's given them. But the reason why we need maintenance is because we need accountability. We need people to help us out when it comes to grief, when it comes to pain, when it comes to sin. The reason why this church is so great in giving counseling is the fact that people can come in and they can unpack problems that they have, and they can see that God has answers for them. One of the greatest things you can do when you go through grief and you go through problems is to find someone who loves Jesus and who is smarter than you. For me, it's pretty easy. It's a room full of folks. Some of you might have to search it out, but if you can find somebody who loves Jesus and is smarter than you, then you don't get Lucy advice. You get good, sound advice. And when you have that, you push through the trials and tribulations you have in your life with proper maintenance, and going forward, you have emotional, spiritual, physical health. But if you shut down and you don't find help and you don't get maintenance, then what happens is you just start to implode. You start to fall apart. Your shutters in your life start to fall off the house. Your roof in your life just starts to fall off of your house. Now listen, if somebody comes to you and they ask you for advice, I'm going to give you one thing and then we'll move on from this. But if somebody's grieving who's around you and they come up to you and they say, hey, I'm really struggling because I lost fill in the blank. I want to give you something that I think is just invaluable, and it's this. Erase at least from your vocabulary. Don't ever, ever, ever say at least to a person who's in grief. I've heard it many times in my life, and I've been present for it to be told to others. I've heard, at least your spouse has a job. At least you're young enough to date again. At least you have somewhere to stay until you get back on your feet. At least you're young enough to try again. Don't ever say at least to a person that's going through grief, that's going through pain. Sometimes the greatest present that you can give a person who is going through grief is your presence and your silence. Just be there. Hold their hand. Let them know that you're there. But don't ever say at least. It's a heartbreaker. So don't camp out in your grief. Maintenance is important to your health. The third thing is this: storms come to everyone. Storms come to everyone. Jesus tells a story, I think it's in Matthew 7. He says that there was once a man who built his house on sand, and there was once a man who built his house on a rock. Now, we all know the story that the storm came, and when the waters rose, the house on sand, it just got swept away and knocked down. But the man who was smart and had wisdom built his house on a rock. He was okay. When the storms rose and the winds blew, he was okay. And we read that story and we think, man, I want to be wise like that guy. I want to build my house on the rock, and that is good. But when I hear that story, you know what I hear? Storms came to both of them. The one who wasn't prepared had a storm, and the one who was prepared had a storm. The storms are going to come. You can live life in the fullest that God has ever given you. You can be here every time the doors open. You can sing every Christian song there is on the radio. You can know Southern gospel. You can know the hymns. You can know contemporary. You can know rap. You can know screaming hardcore Jesus music. You can know it all. But the storms are still going to come, no matter what. And when you're prepared and knowing that storms will come, then guess what? You'll be okay when they get there, because you'll be able to say, I know Jesus has got my back. I know the storms of life are going to come. It's going to be okay. The waters are going to rise. The wind is going to beat against my life. But God, you know, Jesus, you know that I'll be okay. But people don't really prepare for storms until they arrive. No one prepares for a hurricane until there's warnings out. Then you see everybody going to get the plywood. Everybody needs screws. We're going to cover up the windows and the doors. Nobody prepares for death until they get a bad report from the doctor. No one cleans unless they know they're going to have company. No one worries about insurance until they have a wreck. That's me, you know. You see antlers hit a hood, and all of a sudden it's like, what is this going to cost me? What is my deductible? Nobody's worried about premiums until they have a claim. And for us, we don't worry about grief until some terrible storm of life comes along. And Jesus tells us the storms are going to come. Be prepared. Be ready. But be comforted, because point number 4 is this. Jesus is our example. Jesus saw the storm of grief coming to him when he was going to the cross. He saw the storm of grief coming to him way before he ever took the first step with the cross. Jesus let go of his will to go through the grief of the cross for us. Jesus wept for Lazarus and for his family. He was present with them. Jesus cared and was aware of all of those who were around him. He was present for others. He was always loving, and he was always focused on moving people from point A to point B. And Jesus is our example. When we feel alone, he is with us. When we think we can't go any farther, Jesus is with us. Matthew 28:20, he leaves with these words, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. If you're going through hurt and pain and grief, listen, Jesus says, I am with you always. Not sometimes, not when it's happy. I am with you always. When the storms come, I am with you. I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Jesus never leaves us alone. He says, I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you. He has a plan for our lives. And when the storms come and we ride them out and we have people connected around us, this church connection around us, we're able to get through the storms of life. And we are able to get through it and be a little bit stronger. I heard this great teacher one time say that when you go through a valley, don't forget to dig a well for the next person that comes through. And so when you go through pain and go through hurt in a valley, what you're able to do is you're able to look back when you get through it to others who are going to come through that same pain and that same loss in their lives and be able to say, you can do this, you're not alone. I'll give you one more thing, then we'll close. When I meet with people after they've had grief and after they've had loss, I tell them that grief and pain and hurt is a lot like standing in the ocean. And when it is fresh and it is new and you have just lost someone or something that is so valuable to you, it's like you're standing in the ocean and the waves are so big. And they are beating you down and you don't know how you're going to survive. How will you take the next breath? How will you stay on your feet? But with time, the waves start to get a little bit lower. Until you get to a point where you're standing in the water, because you are always standing in the water of pain and grief when it happens to you. You're always going to be there. But you start to notice that the waves are a little bit easier. That today it was a little bit easier, and tomorrow it's going to be a little bit easier. And as you start to be able to just survive, you look around and up the beach on both sides of you, You see other people who are standing in the same grief and the same pain as you are because you're not alone. This is the reason why we need connection. This is the reason why God put everyone in church, in the body together, because he did not want us to stand on the beach alone and drown. He wanted us to look down the beach on both sides and see there are other people who are standing in the water and you're not alone. And so I'm sorry that I got the really sad subject, but I'm not. Because we're all going to go through hurt. We're all going to go through pain. But the most important thing for us to know is that Jesus is not going to leave us. And that we have a church and a connection where we don't have to go through it alone.